It's a cleaner and more appealing look, though it almost makes the Galaxy S23 look a little bit more like a legion of other Android smartphones. And, yes, the iPhone 14 line. Meanwhile, the slightly curved stainless steel-looking aluminum band gives the phone a hint of retro aesthetic that harkens back to the Galaxy series' humble beginnings. That chiseling away of the contour also makes the Galaxy S23 cameras look larger, but they're not. These lenses are the same size as last year. It is a beautifully crafted, IP68 rated device featuring premium materials from the brushed Gorilla Glass Victus 2 on the back to the glossy version of that material, covering the 6.1-inch edge-to-edge screen. There's still a razor-thin speaker slot at the top edge of the screen and a speaker grill along the bottom edge. The Samsung Galaxy S23 line offers eSIM support, but they all still feature a physical SIM slot as well. During my tests, I paired the phone with a nice set of Bluetooth Samsung Galaxy Buds 2 Pro. The Galaxy S23 is essentially the same size and weight as before. I've come to believe that this is the sweet spot of phone sizes. It basically matches my Apple iPhone 14 Pro and, like that handset, is a perfect fit for my average-sized hands. The S23 Plus and, especially that powerful S23 Ultra, are unwieldy for my hands and jean pockets. It's also worth mentioning here that while the phone ships with a USB-C charging and data cable, the charging adapter is sold separately. The S23 does support fast wired charging, but not super fast wired charging, as found in the S23 Plus and S23 Ultra, which both top out at 45 watts. The Galaxy S23 does beat its big sister the S23 Plus on pixels per inch, 425 pi versus 393 pi. The dynamic refresh rate ranges from 48 Hz to 120 Hz. In most instances, though, the Samsung Galaxy S23 is a step behind Apple's iPhone 14 Pro, which offers a higher screen resolution, 2556 x 1179. Better pixel density, and a wider adaptive refresh rate range, 1 Hz to 120 Hz. On the other hand, even in side-by-side tests, it's hard to notice much of a difference. Everything from photos and videos to apps and games look great on the S23 screen, and the 120 Hz refresh rate means games look and feel smooth and ultra-responsive. Scrolling text on a long web page might look like it's skipping frames as you swipe up to down, and games look just a little less fluid at 60 Hz. Again, not a major difference, but if you end up wanting a little more play, viewing, and usage time, stopping down the refresh rate is a clear and not at all painful path. A new advanced vision booster automatically adjusts the screen for optimal color accuracy and contrast against certain ambient lighting conditions. It's the kind of feature that, when it works well, you hardly notice it. Naturally, there's a dark mode that, in supporting apps, looks really sharp. Samsung left its rear camera array virtually unchanged from the S22. In Samsung's defense, they didn't mess with a good thing. On the other hand, I'm frustrated that Samsung didn't at least take the 108MP sensor from the Samsung Galaxy S22 Ultra and migrate it down to the Galaxy S23 and S23 Plus. Virtually all photography improvements can be credited to the image processing on the new Qualcomm Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 mobile platform for Galaxy, and most of them revolve around low light performance. These are 3 excellent sensors that take photos that stand toe-to-toe with the best Apple can offer from its iPhone 14 line. But I do have some quibbles. Samsung still defaults to an over-vibrant view of the world. Blues are bluer, greens are brighter, and generally, everything pops with accentuated contrast. From one point of view, this makes for some truly excellent images straight out the camera, but they can't escape the fact that they are not a perfect representation of the real world. The results are the same with the main 50MP lens, which defaults to a 4-in-1 pixel binning system, meaning each pixel in the final image was actually rendered using the information of 4. In these photos of my Orchid, Samsung's Galaxy S23 favors a vibrant purple over the exquisite detail captured in the iPhone 14 Pro shot. The S23 tops out at 3x optical zoom, 10MP. But it also has AI-assisted space zoom that, in increments of 10x, goes up to 30x. Despite those not being optical, the digitally enhanced zoom far outstrips what you can get by digitally zooming up to 15x on the iPhone 14 Pro. There's a lot of image processing trickery that goes on here to bring you pretty darn good 30x moonshots, and I often wonder how much of the final result is AI filling in the gaps. but there's also nothing else quite like it in the smartphone photography space currently. Of course, the S23 Ultra's 100x space zoom is where the real excitement is. If you're willing to pay at least $1,199 £1,249 AU $1,949, and across the pond, companies like Xiaomi have been bold enough to challenge Samsung's Ultra, but generally the alternatives are sparse when comparing the zoom abilities across the entire S23 range. One other thing that the Galaxy S23 does exceedingly well is optical and electronic image stabilization. You'd be hard-pressed to capture anything usable at 30x without that assistance. The 12MP ultrawide, with its 120-degree field of view, does a nice job, though I think it's time for Samsung to put a 48MP or above sensor behind it to maintain some of the detail on these super wide shots. It's stuck with what is thought to be the same 12MP sensor for more than a couple of generations at this point. The Samsung Galaxy S23 series all run on the Qualcomm Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 mobile platform for Galaxy. Geekbench 5 scores handily beat those of the Snapdragon 8 Gen 1, with optical scores taking a massive leap. While the graphics scores are more easily comparable across platforms, the Galaxy S23's single and multi-core scores still lag behind those of the iPhone 14 Pro's A16 Bionic. However, it doesn't hurt that Samsung backs its bespoke Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 with 8GB of RAM. In our lab tests, the Qualcomm chip appears to have as much headroom as the A16 Bionic, maxing out many of our Adobe Premiere Rush tests. In the extreme rendering, the times and overall scores were just a tick behind the A16 Bionic. Storage-wise, the Galaxy S23 starts with 128GB. If you demand more space upfront, you might want to look to the S23 Plus or S23 Ultra, both of which start at 256GB. With every S23 worldwide running on Qualcomm hardware, rather than a split of Snapdragon and, consistently inferior, Samsung Exynos that varied region to region, the Galaxy S23 offers a decent stereo sound that's sharp, clear, and, naturally, lacking in any real bass. Overall, though, I prefer connecting the phone, which has no audio jack, to a pair of Galaxy Buds 2 Pro, which provides excellent audio and noise cancellation. My Galaxy S23 connected to T-Mobile's excellent 5G UC network, which afforded me a consistent connection in most scenarios. I was able to download apps, stream HD quality Netflix during my commute, and send media-filled texts to my friends. Sadly, I don't have access to a Wi-Fi 6E network to test the S23's bleeding-edge Wi-Fi capabilities. For now, Samsung does not stand on equal footing with Apple when it comes to satellite connectivity. The latter launched emergency SOS via satellite with the iPhone 14 line, and Qualcomm showed how a Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 equipped demo device could send and receive texts over satellite at CES 2023. Both the S23 and S23 Plus pair the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 with the X75G modem, the same one Qualcomm told me is capable of satellite communications, but the capability is not enabled, and there is no timeline for turning it on. For now, Samsung does not stand on equal footing with Apple when it comes to satellite connectivity. The latter launched emergency SOS via satellite with the iPhone 14 line, and Qualcomm showed how a Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 equipped demo device could send and receive texts over satellite at CES 2023. Both the S23 and S23 Plus pair the Snapdragon 8 Gen 2 with the X75G modem, the same one Qualcomm told me is capable of satellite communications, but the capability is not enabled, and there is no timeline for turning it on. Samsung managed to squeeze a slightly bigger battery in the Galaxy S23, going from 3,700 mAh in the S22 to 3,900 mAh battery in the S23. Anecdotally, I got more than a day of battery life, and by day, I mean grabbing the phone at 7 AM and still having juice left at 10 PM. If I didn't charge overnight, I could get halfway through the morning on that same charge. In our lab-based rundown tests, the Galaxy S23 got 10-27 hours of battery life in adaptive refresh rate mode and 11-20 hours at 60 Hz. In my charge tests, I charged more than 50% in 30 minutes using a 25W charger, which is basically in line with our lab tests, where we found we could charge to 55% in 30 minutes. The phone supports the same peak 25W wired charging as its predecessor, along with fast wireless charging and wireless power share. If you want to charge the likes of your Galaxy Buds 2 Pro, Galaxy Watch 5, or even another phone, off the back of your new S23. Like other cool S23 features, wireless power share is not on by default, but it's easy enough to find with a settings search. I used it to charge up my Galaxy Buds 2 Pro. My only complaint is that you have to slide the case around a bit to find that sweet charging spot.